biocharbon ou de l'excédent d'électricité sur les réseaux électriques. L'objectif du programme est de développer une solution viable pour la valorisation des résidus agricoles et agro-industriels à travers leur gazéification et la production d'électricité dans des groupes électrogènes adaptés. De par sa modularité, cette technologie est adaptée pour des puissances entre 100 kW et 2 MW électriques. Cela passe notamment par la capitalisation d'expériences précédentes au Cambodge où IED Invest opère ce type de centrale depuis 2011 afin de transférer cette technologie ainsi que sa fabrication en Afrique de l'Ouest. La réalisation de projets pilotes permettra de mettre l'accent sur l'appropriation locale à travers de la formation et de répliquer ce modèle dans la sous-région, que ce soit à partir de coques d'anacarde, de balles de riz ou de résidus issus de la transformation du bois par exemple. Le programme AgroGazelec favorisera ainsi le développement du tissu économique local, la transition énergétique ainsi que la protection de l'environnement.
MEA was founded in 1993 and listed on the air share market in 2012. MEA is China's leading high-tech enterprise focusing on the R&D and manufacturing of optotronic intelligent identification equipment. MEA is committed to applying intelligent identification technology to cashew sorting and processing by developing a full range of cashew color sorters, such as CF series, KM series, KF series, KFS3 series, K4 series, KS4 series, CG.A series, M series, XS series, XM series, XL series, etc. The whole scene sorting solution can be provided to raw cashew separation, whole cashew separation, split separation, broken pieces separation, tester separation, scorch separation, medium spot separation, shell separation, foreign material separation, and so on. MEA brand new cashew color sorter equipped with AI deep learning technology based on massive cashew sorting data can quickly build and iterate deep learning sorting models to break the problems of micro-color difference, mold and spores which are difficult to solve with traditional color sorters, significantly improving the sorting efficiency and impurities such as single spot, multiple spot, micro-color difference, skin, insect spots, mold and wrinkled skin of cashew kernels. In addition, based on engineering design and intelligent manufacturing, the structure of the whole machine is highly standardized and modularized, which greatly enhance the stability and reliability. MEA is dedicated to creating more value for cashew processors.
En Afrique et en Asie, augmenter la compétitivité des produits finis tout en réduisant la facture énergétique grâce à la valorisation de biomasse représente un enjeu économique majeur pour les pays, tant pour maximiser la valeur ajoutée nationale qu'en matière de création d'emplois. Ces industries peuvent par exemple concerner la transformation de la noix de cajou, du riz ou encore du bois. Néanmoins, la gestion des résidus de transformation et l'approvisionnement en électricité peuvent s'avérer compliqués et coûteux pour les industriels. Le projet AgroGazelec, appuyé par le Fonds français pour l'environnement mondial, a pour vocation de les valoriser en les transformant en électricité au sein même des agro-industries. S'ils sont gérés de manière durable, ces résidus deviennent une opportunité pour ces entreprises.
Recording in progress.
For the 86th time, we are gathering to discuss cashew markets. Good day and welcome to another session of the Global Markets Encounter with Jim Fitzpatrick. The session is available in French and English. You can access your preferred language via the globe icon on the bottom right side of your screen. Today, we are focusing on Tanzania and we will be receiving two guests. Alfred Francis, the Director General of the Cashew Nut Board of Tanzania, and James Muhal, the Chairman of the Tanzania Cashew Processors Association. We are streaming live on the ACA Facebook page and on the ACA YouTube channel, where you could also find the recordings of all past 85 sessions. Remember that as the session goes on, you can ask your questions and leave comments in the description box below. Sorry, I think I would have to get my coffee right this morning. As usual, we are grateful for our partners and sponsors that are making this webinar possible. The European Union, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, the GIZ MoveCom Cashew Project, the Sustainable Nuts Initiative, and the Cashew Club. I am also reminding you that we are 76 days until the 19th ACA Annual Cashew Conference and Expo. From November 18th to 21st of this year in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, we are discussing around the theme, Unlocking Cashew Investment Opportunities for Sustainable Economic Growth. Registration is ongoing, and the good news is that the early bird rates have been extended to September 20th. You can visit the ACA website to register now. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Stella. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, all good here. I'm just back from a trip to Armenia, talking about tree nuts there. Very interesting developments on almonds and pistachio nuts. Interesting times in that region. But today we're going to talk about cashews.
Cashews and focus on Tanzania.
So today we're going to talk about cashews. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You're very welcome. We're going to talk today about our usual topics, the market, of course, but our real focus is on Tanzania, one of the countries that has been, in recent years, fast developing in cashew production and now in cashew processing. And to do that, we're joined by two really interesting guests, people who've been with us before. First, Francis Alfred, the Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania. He's a long history in cashews and has overseen in recent years something of a remarkable development of production in cashew nuts in Tanzania, and now the beginnings of a resurgence in cashew processing in the country. More from him later. We're going to do that by way of a kind of an interview style, so pretty relaxed. And don't forget, anytime, join in the discussion. Any questions, any thoughts, feel free. We're also joined by a good friend of mine, James Mulhall, James is the Managing Director of Coastal Nuts, a large-scale cashew processor based in Mtwara, building year after year, becoming more and more successful, and I've got to say, producing some of the best cashew kernels that I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them over the years. So welcome to Francis Alfred, and welcome to James Mulhall. Before we talk to our two guests, I'm going to talk a little bit about the market, and I'm going to focus on just an update on the market, nothing too detailed, and then we'll have a look at the demand situation. And I want to look at demand because on all the chat groups and in a lot of the social media, I see a lot of negatives on demand, which I don't agree with, and which I'm going to show you by numbers just how strong demand for cashew kernels is right now. Let's start with the market, and let's get stuck in a little bit to what's been going on. So let's review. It's been a while since we've been with you, about 4 weeks. So let's have a look at what's been going on over that period. Well, in the last 4 weeks, we've seen the end of the West African crops, essentially. There's still plenty of material to be shipped, but most activity is coming to an end. Product is mainly in the ports for export, or it has already been shipped. Over the last 4 weeks, the cashew kernels market has been pretty steady. And in the last 3 weeks, after a little dip, RCN prices too are pretty steady. So looking at it right now, over the last 4 weeks, what we've seen is pretty strong shipments on kernels, but also on raw cashew nuts, but relatively slow new activity for the month of August. Over the last week or so, with the court ruling in the United States and the usual statements here and there, particularly negotiations with India and the United States on the trade regime to follow, some of the uncertainty on US tariffs has returned. This uncertainty is not about an increase in tariffs, but about the possibility that better deals may be done in the future. I don't think tariffs will go away. They might temporarily if the court rulings were to stick, but I think they're with us for the time being anyway. And finally, in the last 3 weeks, we've seen a lot of doubts about demand, but frankly, I'm thinking that these are more to do with the need to bring RCN prices more in line with cashew kernels prices because there is still significant business to be done. So that's what I've been seeing over the past 4 weeks, not particularly active period, but a very interesting period nonetheless. What about the coming weeks? What about the next 4 to 5 weeks? Well, this week we're seeing the end of the holiday season in Europe and in the United States, two of our key markets. It's the first week of September. So the first week of September means that the final gearing up for the busy demand period is happening in Europe and the United States. It means that China may start to come back to the market. China's been very active. Let's see if we see China back in the market during September. As we're very conscious of now, the Tanzanian crop will start in September. The Indonesian crop will continue. And if not already started, the Brazilian crop will be starting in the next 3 to 5 weeks. So again, we're looking at coming into a new harvest cycle, the Southern Hemisphere harvest cycle of 2025 to finish the year. Meantime, in India, probably already started, but it'll be gathering pace now. India is gearing up for peak season demand, Diwali, which is the time when Indian demand really peaks. And in the next few weeks, we'll know just what kind of a year it will be for the Indian cashew sector. If we look at what's being harvested, depending on which forecasts you want to take, it's anywhere from 900 to 1.1 million tons to be harvested between now and January. That is a huge turnaround. That is, depending again on the forecast you take, that's between 30 and 60% increase on 5 years ago, mainly due to dramatic growth of production in Tanzania, but also increases in Mozambique. Elsewhere, Indonesia and Brazil, we haven't seen the same kind of growth, and probably this year in Brazil we'll see a slight contraction, more back to an average, or a modern average, let's call it, than last year's good crop. But let's not also forget that most of that material will take about 6 to 8 weeks to get to the market. And we'll hear more about Tanzania a little bit later on. That's where the bulk of this material will come from now. We're looking at a period that's going to see the Southern Hemisphere gather momentum, last chance for buyers to buy for this year's consumption, and a lot of particularly European and American buyers will be looking at their forward cover, looking into next year. So where are we on prices? Well, let's have a look. And this is information is gathered with the help of the ACA publication, the Afri-Cashew Splits, which collects information in African countries on raw cashew nut prices and kernels prices. It comes out every 2 weeks, and it's quite a good read. And what we've seen really over the last couple of weeks is pretty unchanged. The market is maybe on kernels 5 cents up in Vietnam from where it was a month ago. But essentially it's been unchanged. It's been quiet in August. The premiums for African cashew kernels have slightly narrowed, but generally been maintained based on quality, based on location, and to a certain extent, and for some, based on sustainable supply chains. The clarity that we saw on tariffs a month ago has somewhat been eroded, as I've mentioned. That doubt, I don't think it's impacted the market so far, but it could. Meantime, demand is remarkably resilient. These prices we're looking at are in the region of 30% higher than the early part of 2024, but demand still marches on unstoppably, apparently. But there are some signs of the economic impact of tariffs in the US market, which is an important cashew market. About 20% of the world's consumption is in the US. We're going to have a look at some of those demand factors again in a few minutes. RCN prices pretty steady, not too much offered. There's plenty from resellers, of course. There are stocks in Vietnam, stocks in India. Generally what we're seeing, some unsold quantities, some quantities that will be committed Guinea-Bissau, for example, I think they'll have no difficulty selling what's left if they haven't already sold it. They just need to ship it, perhaps. There are some volumes in Côte d'Ivoire which might be a little bit more tricky, although we'd have to say that the quality has been maintained quite steady through the season in Côte d'Ivoire, which is interesting. It's been a good quality season. Let's hope it's the first of many more to come. Buyers right now of raw cashew nuts, I think that they're a little bit unclear on exactly what their needs are. And I think they're a little bit nervous about that there might be too much buying to be done. Sellers are saying that there's little left and quality is low. This is the normal cut and thrust propaganda, if you want. RCN buyers, we see a lot of chat that demand on kernels is suppressed. That's just not true. And we're seeing a lot of chat that we could run out or get very tight on cashew supply, and that's just not true either. So for me, steady market, probably prices a little bit overstated in RCN at the moment compared to the kernels market, and they could do with something of a correction. Africa, so let's have a quick update on Africa. Starting in West Africa, Côte d'Ivoire, as I said, some stocks left. The processing volume this year will be a new record, of course. It marches on. Processors have bought significant volumes. I think they've probably bought a lot of material that they will or have already sold as raw cashew nuts for export. 650,000 tonnes already exported. That's a little bit behind the normal for the season. There is quite a bit left in the hands of CCA, who intervened in order to support the market, but did so without really disturbing the market by the looks of it. If we add it all up, if we add up the stocks, if we add up the process estimate and what's been exported, for me, that's somewhere between 1.45 and 1.5 million tonnes. Some people are saying about 500,000 tonnes below that. Either way, it's a new record. And it's also probably one of the best quality crops that we've had for some years. Guinea-Bissau, they're telling me about 150,000 tonnes has been exported, maybe a touch more. They're expecting approximately 250,000 tonnes to run through the port of Bissau, but informal export is back. We can see that in Senegal's export figures. Senegal's crop has not risen by the kind of numbers that would support their export. We see strong export from the Gambia too, which must be based on a certain amount of informal trade between the three countries. Again, we could be looking at a record crop if we add it all up. It's certainly a good crop. And again, it's a good quality crop. And of course, Guinea-Bissau is the last of the higher quality material left in West Africa. As usual, the next high quality material will come from Tanzania. If we look in Benin, there's not a great deal of news, but it is still somewhat disappointing to see estimates of processing around about 60,000 tonnes for the year, to hear stories of some factories closed, unable to operate for want of raw material. This is disappointing. I think it demonstrates that export bans don't work, or at least they're almost impossible to enforce, and that this is a little bit disappointing given the huge investment in processing in Benin in recent years. Let's hope that some way is found to correct that or to improve it. But I must say, my personal opinion is that it's time for a rethink. Moving to East Africa, and of course we'll hear about Tanzania shortly, but Mozambique, looking at a very positive crop forecast. The official forecast is plus 23% last year. That'll be more than 200,000 tonnes, something like 213,000 tonnes, I think. That's remarkable. I'm not sure myself of the actual number, but I am sure of the trend, and it is positive. So big crops all around in Africa. Great progress on processing in Côte d'Ivoire, some progress on processing in Nigeria too. Difficulties in Benin, difficult times in Ghana, also for processors. So quite a mixed situation, but it is clear that processing continues to grow in West Africa. Let's move away from Africa for a moment and have a look at the situation in Vietnam. So the numbers in Vietnam are telling us an interesting story. Imports are up by about 150,000 tons. That's about 8% on last year. And last year was a big year for imports. Exports of cashew kernels are only, and I say only because last year was the biggest year on record, they're only down by about 2%. So exports are only down by 2% in a year when kernels prices are up by almost 30%. When there's been disruption in the US market, this is a remarkable performance. Let's hope it continues into the second half of the year. There were lower opening stocks, so things have got tight, but there were also fewer forward sales. So the combination of fewer forward sales, partly due to the tariffs, partly due to higher prices and the uncertainty around the global economy as a result of the US trade interventions, there were fewer forward sales this year. Perhaps also more business in Africa might have had an impact on that too. That's created a period of uncertainty, and although imports are quite positive, there may be a possibility that the impact of the US tariff situation in 2025 has been overestimated, and perhaps that's reflected on the way that trade has been done on raw cashew nuts. So we're looking at higher costs for raw cashew nuts. Kernels haven't quite matched up to that, but we need to be careful with export average prices on kernels because we have to somehow apply the grades to that, and that's a pretty difficult thing to do. So there is somewhat of a gap, but perhaps not as big a gap as the basic statistics would suggest. Meantime, we see spectacular demand from China, really remarkable growth there. I think this, in summary, so 2025 is matching the record year for exports. If I calculate the stocks, so I'm taking the crop, the imports, the opening stocks, the exports, a little bit of domestic consumption, not too much, trying to make some kind of an allowance for what people are saying is stocks held in transit. I'm not entirely sure if that is a major figure because I'm not entirely sure that you can do that to any great volume, at least in a way that makes sense. But that would say to me that the inventories of RCN are 2 to 2.5 months, maybe 3 months, and that's adequate. So it's reasonably well stocked, I would say, for the time of year, given there's still material to come from West Africa and we're on the verge of East African crops. What does all that mean? I think I just draw a couple of conclusions from that. I think it means that processors are unlikely to force kernels prices down. I don't think it would have any impact on raw cashew nut prices or any significant impact. I don't think it would change the situation, and I think it would actually chase buyers out of the market. So I don't think they're going to do that. I do think that maybe that processors have kind of talked themselves into an overestimation of the impact of the combination of US tariffs and general price rises, that demand has proven to be far more resilient than might have been expected in this scenario, especially in the first half of the year. So a lot of countries are experiencing first half of 2025 booms in exports to the United States. That may not be reflected in the second half of the year, we shall see. My calculations suggest that Vietnam still needs to import about 550,000 tons. So that would bring the number up to 2.6, something like that. Pretty healthy figure for the year, no doubt, but that product is available. So there's no real suggestion of any shortage. We've had excellent crops. We have the prospect of excellent crops. What we're negotiating at the moment, I think, as a market is who holds the material, how strong they are, and how quickly is it needed. And That discussion has caused prices to firm up a little bit, but it may not continue. So Vietnam should be in a good position. Chinese demand has made the year something other than was expected. What about India? Well, let's have a look at India, and I'll just let's zoom in a little bit on India's imports. So if we look at the Indian situation over the months, so the red bars are 2025 imports by month. The grey and black are the previous 2 years, and July is an estimate from the trade. The other figures are official figures. July is an estimate from the trade. That's why it's in the lighter colour. So if we look at that, what we're seeing is after a rather slow start to the year, through April, May, June, and probably July, India has caught up. So India's imports of raw cashew nuts are beginning again to look quite healthy. If we look at the cumulative for the year, so this is the cumulative build-up month by month, adding January to February to March to April. That's the green bar. And then the lines track the same figures for the previous years. So you can see the biggest year in history, 2022. But let's remind ourselves at the end of 2022, there was a significant carry-out in India. This is not the benchmark by which we should judge the trends in the market. But if we look at 2024 and 2023, we do see that imports are ahead of both of those years. And that catch-up has had its impact. Looking also more broadly at the situation, if we take imports in recent years, so here you have the grey bars are the imports. We'll zoom in on this for a moment. Grey bars are the imports over the years. You can see the big number in 2022, and the orange, the harvest. So the two together represent the supply in India, plus whatever opening stocks there were. So what we're seeing is, if we exclude 2022, which was a bit of an overbuying for various reasons, we're seeing a very positive trend. This is reflected in demand. We're seeing the crop, I think this year probably recovered from the problems of last year, but perhaps not as good as 2023. Now, I say that because it did end a little bit early. The rains came a little bit earlier than normal, and that may have truncated the crop in some areas. It's very difficult to get hold of official figures on the Indian crop, which makes one wonder exactly what's happening, given that so many other figures are readily available in India and rather efficiently available too. But so far, if we take the July estimate, 754,000 tonnes imported, and that's looking pretty much on target. So I think with imports already about 11% on the official figures, 11% ahead for January, June. Rumour, discussion, estimates of July is pretty strong, so that would probably put us a little bit ahead again. I think at the end of the June, about 570,000 tonnes was still needed. By the end of July, that's probably something like 330 to 350,000 tonnes. So still some business to be done, still some product to be imported. Demand is steady, but it could be strong coming to the end of the year. Now, it's interesting because we do see some, at least we see here in the media, some negative reports on the Indian economy. But when I look at the more in-depth reviews, people like Deloitte and Reuters, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, what we're seeing is a return to pretty strong growth. So Indian growth is consumer driven. It has been strong. People are talking about a return to the pre-COVID pattern. Now, pre-COVID, demand for cashew nuts was growing very quickly in India. And I think by the end of this year, we might have seen exactly the same situation. So to remind ourselves, if India uses something like 1.83 million tonnes of cashews every year, if that's growing at 6%, it's a significant dent in the paper oversupply that we're facing this year and that we may be facing in coming years given good crops. Overall then, looking at the situation, I think we're taking our bulls and bears, our factors that might make prices lower. Yes, large southern crops. Questions on the US economy, but I don't think that will hit till 2026. How will the Indian economy perform? Many reports suggest positively, 6.4 to 6.7% GDP growth is really strong. And a lot of these negative factors are factors that will take some time to have an impact. So it's difficult to see any short-term negative, lower price pressure factors in the market. What about on the other side, on the blue side of the equation? Well, we are seeing resilient demand. We're seeing the approach of the peak season. Now, the peak season approach, it means different things in different markets. So if you're in Europe, the product that you need for the coming peak season, the festivals, coming up to Christmas and New Year festivals, that product was bought a long time ago. All that needs to be done maybe is to top it up a little bit. But if you're in China or perhaps in India, the market works differently and that product may still need to be bought. So the impact of the Chinese surge in demand this year, or surge in shipments from Vietnam, is significant. And that might mean further physical orders coming to the market over the next 3 or 4 months. If we look at, I think the big question actually on this whole thing is, has demand been underestimated? Many of us feared in January that we would see the impact of pending tariff negotiations, the impact of higher prices damaging demand. And we thought that that might mostly affect markets like China, like India, where price was a really important factor. We knew it would affect the United States, and we were less sure about Europe. But none of that's happened really. Demand has been remarkably resilient. And as we go into this last 3 to 4 months of the year, the raw cashew nut that is available tends to be higher quality. So Tanzanian raw cashew nuts are higher quality. Higher quality usually means higher price. So it is quite difficult to see at the moment any reason for the market to break out of the current range. I do think RCN prices need a little bit of a correction. Whether that will happen or not depends on how strong the holders of that material are. Our second focus today, before we come on to Tanzania, is demand. And as I was mentioning, this is a time of year when there's a lot of rumors on demand. The picture is becoming clearer. There's a lot of rumors. We know roughly what production is now in the Northern Hemisphere. It is important to try and understand the realities of demand. As many people choose to use rumors or estimates of demand to try and influence the cost of their raw material. So we'll have a look at a few markets, and I want to start by having a look at the European market. So we get quite good numbers in Europe, and the numbers are only available at the moment officially until the end of June. And these are the European Union, 27 countries, plus the UK, which covers 90% of European demand. So what we've seen, if we just look at, again, monthly imports, the blue is 2023, the green is 2024, and the red is the current year. And as you can see, after a strong start, next 3 months matched previous years, spike up in May, and then that's by 13% May against May 24, down by 14% June. Doesn't mean a lot. However, there is a 6.44% growth in imports in the first 6 months of the year. This is significant. This matches the short-term, the 5-year growth rate. So the compound annual growth of imports into 28 countries of mainly Western Europe is 6%, and this year it's actually exceeding that in the first half. The combined effect is that the European market in the first half of the year was larger than the US market. And that has been a trend, and it looks like a trend that's set to continue. So quite positive in Europe. In terms of sources of supply, Vietnam continues to dominate as expected, about 72% in January, June. But Africa, especially Cote d'Ivoire, has increased, and the share of market that African processors have in Europe is now up to about 21%. So this is far higher than in any other market. It's about 8% in the United States. I'm going to need to look at those numbers again, but it's strong in Europe. And reasons for that are quality, location, sustainability, diversification of supply, shorter supply chains, so many different factors contributing to the growth of interest in African processing. Good picture from Europe. What about the US? Well, it's less positive. Overall imports are down by 10.3%. Now, there is a little bit of a story in this, because if you were to look at the import of natural kernels, what we over many years measured as the key factor, they're down by 21%, and that would reflect shipments from Vietnam. So Vietnam on natural kernels is seeing a drop of about 21%. And you can see this trend on the chart. So this light browny color is natural kernels. This is our well-known tariff heading 080132. The light blue is processed. So this is a figure for the import of processed nuts. I've extracted things like Brazil nuts. I've extracted, by going through them line by line, we take out what we think is not cashews. And we get to this figure, and what we're seeing is a very strong trend in the import of processed cashew kernels. And this is dominated by Vietnam. So in 2025, January to June, 70% of imports were natural and 30% were roasted or processed, mainly in bulk. This consumer packs is not in this tariff heading. If we go back to 2016, it was 92% natural and 8% roasted. So there's certainly a trend there. And we see strong growth also January, June 2025 compared to January, June 2024. So it's no longer enough to look at simply the imports of natural cashew kernels under the usual tariff heading. Strong growth in processed kernels, up 28%. We put the two together, that gives us a decline in imports by about 10.3%. Now, we'll have to look and see, is that going to be representative of the whole year? And we'll have a look at that in a moment. Overall, the US market is growing at about 3%, taking the two into account. That's quite healthy for a mature market. Again, that may take a little blip this year for sure, but there are a lot of changes. There are a lot of developments in the US market. I think what we're seeing is a different kind of consumer of cashew kernels, a younger consumer, more health-focused consumer, a change in the demographic. In the past, cashews were mainly consumed by wealthier people, middle-class people of an older age who consumed this product as a snack, and that's changing. It has already changed in Europe, I think, and it is changing also in the United States. And that is likely to make the market a little bit more resilient than it otherwise would be when prices rise. Let's have a look at the US in a little bit more detail. So what we're trying to figure out is January, June likely to be represented by a year. So I'm looking here just at natural cashew kernels, the 70% of the imports. And what we see is a pretty mixed picture. So the red is the January-June situation. So if red is up here, it means January-June imports were 21.9% higher than the previous year. The grey is the full year. Is that the right way around? That's the right way around. So we need to look at the grey for the full year and the red for the first half to try and work out whether this will be representative. So in 2024, yes, it was. But in 2023, no. First half imports were much worse than the whole year. In 2022, the first half imports were much better than the first year. So we know in 2022, inflation kicked in the US, and food inflation is still a fact of life in most countries, but it's certainly a fact of life in the United States. Second half, 2022, we know what happened in 2022, Ukraine war, the economic impact of that, inflation, economic uncertainty. Second half, exports really crashed, and that carried over into 2023. So we can't absolutely say that this situation of the first half of the year will be repeated in the second half of the year. In fact, there might be a good argument to suggest that this kind of a situation, 2022 second half, 2023 first half, might impact 2025. My guess is that we won't see the impact of higher prices until next year. So this, we did not think that on the 2nd of September 2025 that Reuters would be reporting Wall Street opens lower on tariff uncertainty. So tariff uncertainty still, and that's to do with the court ruling in the United States that said that the president didn't have the authority to impose tariffs, or at least tariffs that penalize other countries. It doesn't mean tariffs will go away, because I presume there's a mechanism, would take time, that the tariffs could be reinstated, and of course the case will be appealed. Meantime, Walmart, a huge American retailer, says that although they have managed to keep some of the price increases related to tariffs away from consumers, it is changing, and it will continue, and probably prices will start to rise. We do know that there was a surge in imports of all products at the end of last year and in the beginning of this year related to tariffs. Just to put it in perspective, I heard this morning that here in our country, I live in Ireland, and in Ireland, we exported the same or slightly more to the United States in the first 6 months of 2025 as we did in the entire year of 2024. Obviously, that cannot continue. So we're going to see a different scenario depending on the economic outlook in the second half of the year. Food inflation is a factor, but we also need to ask the question, to what extent will people's behavior in their decision to buy or not to buy cashew kernels be impacted by the price? And there are arguments both ways. In the past, we've seen zero impact and we've seen big impact. So I think much more impactful is the condition of the economy, as 2022, 2023 has shown us. We need to keep an eye on that. It's more important for next year, I think. It's more important for decisions on forward contracting with Vietnamese processors especially than it is for short-term moves. I wouldn't be going out and thinking this market's going to crash because of the US now. Don't think that'll happen. But we may see an absence of US buying 2-3 months down the road. What about Vietnam? Well, you have to look at Vietnam if you're talking about the world situation. January through July, look at this number, 412,000 tons. This is remarkable. Just, I think I said 2% down on previous years. The other figures, this figure would suggest less, but I think that's a rounding error. So the question really is, does this January-July situation, does that reflect the full year? And if we look back month by month this year, we saw a very slow start to the year, but after that it's been pretty steady, strong in May. So there might be a correlation with announcements on tariffs there, which were made during April. shipments in May. But generally speaking, if we look at the Vietnamese situation in terms of the export trend, with the exception of 1 year, 2022, what happens in the first year reflects the eventual outcome. So most exports take, just to add, while we're looking at it, look at this. I mean, 191,000 tons in 2018, 240, let's call it, in 2019, up to 412, 415 last year. This is remarkable. So what's happened is that shipments to China have compensated the drop in shipments to the United States more than when you add in additional shipments to Europe and additional shipments to West Asia. Let's have a look at those two markets then. So here we're looking at shipments from Vietnam. On the left, China, January to July 2023, 24, 25. 2025 is up by 30% on last year. That's incredible. West Asia, so by West Asia, I mean Middle East, the Gulf, Turkey, countries like Iraq, a whole range of countries, mainly traded into the Gulf, but Turkey increasingly also a significant buyer. And shipments to those countries are again up by 31%. This is really strong. Now, as you can see, this market is not as large a market as China or Europe or the United States, but it is a significant market. It's also a market that likes premium large quality cashew kernels too. But the story is really China. And China's growth, if this were to continue, we have 3 years of strong growth now, and if this were to continue, China would be the largest market in the world in 3 years. That's taking the EU as a single market. It would be the largest market in the world. So if this were to continue, now I'm not sure this kind of growth can continue, but if it were, China would be going from 47,000 tons to something like 200,000 tons in 5 years. Now, if that continues, we have a completely different supply-demand balance. How dependent is that on changes in price? Hard to say. It's so new. Would it increase prices? Probably not, because production is pretty strong. What we would see is that if we had a year of poor crops, particularly in West Africa or in Cambodia, if that were to happen, then we would see extreme volatility in price. Who knows? But it does look very positive. And what it means is that since Cambodia has come into play as the world's second largest producer, we've seen, on paper at least, a surplus of supply over consumption. That was forecast to disappear around about 2031, according to me. China's growth means that that would disappear potentially by 2027, 2028. So quite an interesting situation developing, particularly if that continues. So let's have a look at the outlook. So I think that RCN stocks are adequate. There's a bit of business still to be done. I think kernels prices look steady. I think people will look at their forward cover, particularly for 2026 Q1 and Q2 in September, and they'll decide if they need to make any moves. And they may do, but I don't expect to see any major surge of buying. Southern Hemisphere crops look good, and they continue to increase in volume. Demand for cashew kernels is very strong. It is as strong as it has ever been. I've been watching this since about 1984, and we've seen spurts of growth many times, but this looks very, very positive indeed. But supply is good. So for now, I don't see much reason for price volatility. I think the raw cashew nut trade from the auction in Tanzania and eventually from Mozambique may be a little bit less exciting and a little bit less volatile than last year, which is probably good news for everyone. Relatively stable price finish to the end of the year. I think we've seen the negative impact of the US trade situation And I don't think that this demand will turn off anytime soon. So let's turn our focus then to Tanzania. And let's turn our focus to the emerging producer of cashew nuts. So let me give you a quick couple of facts. We're going to have two interview style conversations with Alfred Francis, the Director General of the Cashew Board of Tanzania, and then with James Mulhall, the Managing Director of Coastal Nuts Tanzania. So as you can see, Tanzania has experienced something of a revolution in its production. Remarkable growth, forecast again good this year. Tanzania is fourth in the world now, second in Africa, which is a tremendous achievement. We're looking at high quality raw cashew nuts. We're looking at trees. You can just see on the map, it's a very rough map. You can see that the number of trees planted is spreading around the country, that the new growing areas are outside the traditional areas. Of course, these traditional areas have continued to grow. We're looking at harvest September to December, the opposite of the bulk. And this is a little bit rebalancing the north-south balance in terms of the cashew harvest. The organization of the sector in Tanzania, we'll hear more about that shortly, but I'd remind you, raw cashew nuts are marketed through an auction. The Tanzanian Mercantile Exchange from last year took part in that, and that the supply chain is organized around local marketing co-ops and cooperative unions. So Tanzania, it looks to me, has entered a fast growth phase with new trees, better inputs, distribution, support from the government, and some new processors, one of whom we're going to hear from shortly. It looks good. So I'd like to welcome Francis Alfred, the DG of the Cashew Board of Tanzania. Good morning. Stella, can you help us out here on this?
I would suggest we start with James since he's already with us while we try to fix out the technical issue with Alfred.
Okay, very good. Let me move on.
Thank you.
I'll introduce James Mulhall, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation. James Mulhall is the Managing Director of Coastal Nuts in Tanzania. As I mentioned, a business really producing some terrific cashew kernels. This is a long-term project which they've put together, and it's now in operation. James will tell us about the operations, but I think it's now into beginning its fourth year in operation. The business has been successful. We all know how difficult it is to get into cashew processing, and they've managed to do so. James, good morning.
Good morning, Jim.
How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, oh good. Listen, thanks very much for joining us this morning. It's really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to hear your point of view on Tanzania and to hear about the progress of Coastal Nuts. I was going to come to you second. We'll put you in a different order. I hope you don't mind. These are the joys of online interactions. So I know it's been a long road and it's been a tough road. I know for you personally to get into this business and for Coastal Nuts. The way I see it and what little I know about your business, that there is light at the end of the tunnel for Coastal Nuts. You are making progress. What is it like to be a cashew processor in Tanzania?
I was thinking about this yesterday, and I think one of the principles or things we need is learning across the entire spectrum. So we're learning as cashew processors, but every element of cashews it takes some learning to understand how processing works. I suppose it was tough last year, especially tough for all processors. It's probably in its infancy, really, and it was particularly difficult last year because we had constricted access to RCN. And as a processor anywhere in the world, access to RCN is your key element, but also being a single origin processor and issues around being a single origin processor takes a little bit of learning and a bit of understanding, and it takes time to do this. So it's also my experience in East Africa. Tanzania will be more bureaucratic than the other countries in East Africa, which is quite challenging. So just again, the learning and the understanding. We're almost 100% mechanization, and we're one of the first businesses to do this. And there's heavy investment to do this. And then if there's a lot of learning, it can be quite frustrating at times. Then we would have, the market now at the moment is also changing heavily towards traceability and sustainability. So we're happy to say we were the first cashew processor to get BRC accreditation, but now we are implementing SMETA as well, because that's what the market needs. It takes more investment to do this, but if you're going to supply markets that need it and at scale, that's what we need to do. So we're learning this, and we're learning what we need to do. But yeah, the difficulty is the whole spectrum of understanding how processing works. So that's what's made it difficult so far.
Tell us about your setup. You have what equipment do you have? Is it, where did you buy it? Which country did you buy it from?
So we bought a fully mechanized plant from Vietnam. They are the guys, the best in the business, processing. And we brought a plant there, brand new plant, and brought it over to Tanzania and set it up in Tanzania. So we needed to be able to supply the market. You need to be able to do a certain amount of scale to supply customers that need volume. And then the mechanization also will help us produce or process better quality cashew nuts and better margin cashew nuts as well.
So I guess, I mean, by the way, your achievement of a BRC certification relatively quickly, I mean, it's one of the faster that I've heard of. How important is that in reaching the kind of customers you want to sell to?
Everyone is asking for my certification, or our certification, I should say, because it took a lot of work of all the staff to get it. Nearly everywhere is asking for accreditation. Even in the Middle East, they're asking, do you have accreditation? Just to be able to supply the market. So anywhere in the US, everyone is saying, just as a standard, where is your BRC? In the less strict markets, and obviously in the more strict markets, it's a requirement. But even BRC is not enough. Now we're implementing SMETA at the moment, because it's about traceability and sustainability. They're the two key things that the market is telling us that we need. So to be able to access these markets, that's what we need.
So one of the key things,
it takes a lot of time and money, though. That's an investment. That's the challenge.
But is it an investment that pays off? Are customers rewarding Coastal Nuts with better pricing and more orders because you've done these things?
I would say you have greater access to the market. So without it, you have a smaller market, and with it, you have a bigger market. And we need, I suppose the reason there's a couple of reasons we came to Tanzania. One was location. We were living and working in Uganda. The second would be that we thought it was an opportunity because there was low levels of processing at the time. But the third is quality. We have quality cashews in Tanzania. We're not responsible for it, the farmers are. and we do have quality. And to be able to get to those quality markets, to reward the quality, because we're buying RCN at a high price, we need to get a good price because we have the qualities. So to get access to quality markets that may be able to reward you for your quality, you need these things in place. And that's a must, I suppose, to be able to access the quality markets to then make it worthwhile.
So with your quality, which I know is high, with your BRC accreditation, and now with SMETA, you will be amongst the leading processors, not just in Tanzania, but in Africa, in these areas. That should, I think people doing these things explains the growing market share in more difficult markets like Europe. You've explained to us why did you choose Tanzania rather well. I was going to ask you about the supply chain. So I had prepared a question that it was based on Francis Alfred having spoken to us already. So I'll just phrase it a little bit differently. I mean, how would you like to see the supply chain organized in Tanzania to facilitate the development of processors like yourselves?
Access to RCN is the most important, given that I would have thought it was a fundamental, given if you set up a factory that you'll be allowed to access RCN. It didn't work out that way last year. So access to RCN and sustained or long-term access to RCN is the first and fundamental part. So now we have done a lot of work on this year, and you can blame the government or you can blame Alfred or CBT for everything if you like, but we also have to take some responsibility as processors, and we have to be able to organize ourselves and strengthen the industry. And that's why it might sound strange, but I'm happy if more processors come into Tanzania, and would encourage them to come in because we need a stronger industry. But one of the main things we did this year is we strengthened the Tanzania Association of Cashew Nut Processors. And I have to say well done to the guys this year who did put in all the hard yards and did great work on strengthening us so as we have a voice, so the industry has a voice. Because again, I'll come back to learning. You can blame the government, but until the government understand the intricacies of single origin processing, they can't really help us so understand. So part of this process is helping everyone understand, creating a good body, TACP, and the stronger they become, the stronger the industry will become as a result. So that's what I've learned ourselves as processors, that the TACP are critical to what we need. But relative to my experience in East Africa, the banking infrastructure here is also needs learning as well, because it's not a simple trading process of turning your money very quickly, buying and selling. It's single origin. We have to stockpile our cashews for processing, and that's the level of learning there I would have thought would be a bit higher. But again, we have to go through this process. We're the first in of a fully mechanized process in plant. So we just have to be patient with the process of learning and just keep working on that process to try and help everyone understand how it works.
So you're very much the modern pioneers. The processors that have set up in recent years are very much the modern pioneers. But I'm hoping that come the African Cashew Alliance conference in November in Tanzania, that we'll hear more from the TACP. I'm looking forward to that. It's really interesting what you say about organisation being important. I couldn't agree with you more, and I've been seeing exactly the same factors in other countries in recent weeks. But let's come to the market. What about the market? You've been doing pretty well. You've been selling, I know, successfully. How do you see the market in the coming months? We're talking cashew kernels particularly.
Again, I'm trying to, as best I can, because our process is we're trying to get direct to the end user as much as possible and not trade cashews, because we have good quality. You find a good quality customer, they will be connected through a relationship of good quality cashews, because that's what they need rather than just a price-based cashew. So it takes time to do that. It takes time to build up a relationship, and any new customer will want to come down to the factory, look at the factory, see for themselves what's your BRC accreditation like, what's your SMETA like, what's your setup like, and can you deliver the cashews at the quality you're saying. And that's why being able to have some scale, we're not a huge factory of any sort, but just have some scale to be able to supply these companies. So the general market is we'll see how it goes this year, but what we're trying to focus on is finding the connection to develop end user or close to end user, develop a relationship, and then we have to have the professionalism to be able to supply and communicate and talk to these customers, because it will make use of the way. But it takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of time to prove that the cashews are the quality that they are, and for us to make sure that we keep supplying that. So, yeah, that's how I see the market, or that's how we're trying to develop our own market, if that's a better way of putting it.
Recording in progress.
And what you've just outlined absolutely expresses that for us. And it is interesting, and it's also interesting that you have invested in the tools, the certifications, accreditations, and equipment to make that happen.
Like, for example, there's cons to be. It's more cockpile. You have to have everything in place during this season, because you don't get a second chance to buy RCN. However, on the other side of things, we can go to a customer working with a retailer, and they say, well, we need 12 months or 9 to 12 months price, because that's what the retailer wants. So we can actually that to you, because we know what our margin will be when we agree price you, or we'll know to a good degree what it will be. So we can have a benefit to customers who need a little bit longer term price, whereas it's a negative to us in the shorter term markets, because the shorter term markets we take some risk on prices going up and down throughout the year. So it depends what customer we get the connection with.
So it's about matching with the right kind of customer, and from the customer's rather than worrying about where the market's going, provided you've got those links. So it's about matching with the right customer. That's really interesting. Okay. Well, let me ask you the last question. Any regrets? Any regrets on the decision to get into cashew processing?
That's a good question. It's probably too early to tell, actually. We're relatively young business starting up, and maybe in a year or two's time, I'll come back to you and say this is the greatest idea and it's really, really worked well for us, or I might not. Any startup business is going to have certain issues. So, yeah, it's just too early to tell at the moment. So we'll see.
Okay, I have a feeling that you'll be coming back to us, telling us that it was one of the best decisions you ever made.
Hopefully.
I hope so. Time will tell. James, stay with us. We're going to have a chat with Alfred Francis. But stay with us. No doubt there'll be some comments and some questions. So let me say, good morning, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, oh, good. It's nice to see you again. I think we
Yeah.
last met at the conference. So you must be looking forward to the African Cashew Alliance conference in November in Tanzania. That should be a tremendous event and opportunity.
Sorry?
You must be looking forward to the African Cashew Alliance conference
Yes, for
in
sure.
November.
First, Jim, I'd like to apologize for joining late. Apology to all the members who are participating in this meeting. So very sorry.
Thank you. So,
Yeah.
it's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining. I know you're busy. Let's get into a few thoughts and questions. What do you think is the outlook for the new upcoming crop in Tanzania?
Yeah. Currently, because we are expecting a very good crop, and we are expecting the crop to be not bad, because now we are going through the farms, going around. I've been going around, and we are expecting the season to be very good with a very quality crop, because now no rain at all, and it's very hot here in Tanzania, which is a very important climate for cashew. So we are expecting to have a good season.
There has been a lot of really good growth in recent years. Last year was a tremendous crop. This year could be another one. What have been the main factors that have been responsible for this increase in production?
Uh, for sure, it's a combination of factors, but one of the main factors is the initiative of the government to support the farmers on providing extension services. As you know, now we've employed more than 500 youth from the university who are just there in the village to provide extension services. But also, we've been providing inputs on subsidy. So it means most of the crop, they've been resistant to most of the, even to, if you look at this year, the effect of powdery mildew has decreased substantially. And because of the subsidy has been being issued on subsidy for more than 3 years, it has been having a significant effect. But also, there have been very good collaboration between Cashew Nut Board of Tanzania government, private sector, cooperative unions, the district council, the regional. We've been having a good collaboration between various stakeholders in serving the farmers, and also including TARI as a research. So it's a combination of factors, but also we know last year and we are expecting the same this year. There has been a favorable environment, as you know, in production. Apart from other factors, also the favorable environment normally has got effect on the production and sometimes even on the quality of the cashew. So it's a combination of factors, but the main factor is the government initiative to support the farmers through provision of input, extension services, and the other services to farmers.
So you would expect that production will continue to increase in the coming years?
Yes, we expect that, because we are putting a lot of effort, and with this government effort, we are sure that it's going to increase.
That's good news, I think.
Although we are proceeding to make much more effort to make sure that what we are saying, what we are projecting, comes to become a realization. So we are putting more effort. We are not relaxed. We are putting more effort. So with the effort we're putting in place, we are sure that we are going to increase the production as per projection.
That's great news, I think, for everyone. But what about, I'm particularly interested, and I know you share this interest in developing cashew processing in the country. There have been some discussions about the rules and regulations around processors' access to AMCOs or to organised farmers generally. What are the current regulations for processors buying raw material, which James Mulhall, I don't know if you heard it, was telling us sourcing raw material is the key essential aspect.
Yes, for sure. We initiated a program called Primary Market for Local Process. although there have been challenges here and there in the course of implementation. And this year we have improved that guidelines much better than the previous year, and it's already operational now. Now, from now, the process can buy cashew. One thing I'd like to assure the processors, we know we've been going through some turbulences up and down. Processors have been having some difficult part of the time, but I want to assure them that the government is there to support processors. We may have not reached where the processors want, but I want to assure them as years goes by, we'll continue to improve the environment. For example, we know, for example, processors would like to have financing for raw material. We know that as it's with 1-digit interest rate for them they are getting. We know some of them would like to remove most of the taxes to be zero for them. We know that they are concerned. We know about so we are working on those. We are going step by step. For example, this year we've allowed them to from 1st September, processors are allowed to buy cashew direct from the farmers through AMCOS. It means they'll have more than 1.5 months to procure cashew through negotiation through farm, 1.5 months in advance before the start of the auction, because we're expecting to start the auction between 14th and the 30th next month, depending on the volume of the cashew, which will be collected at that particular point in time. So I want to assure the president, when the people want to come to Tanzania, the government, even if you look at the Vision 2050, we are talking about selling value additional agricultural crops. And cashew is one of the issues, one of the main sources. For example, now, even for the small scale processors now, we are coming with a very good arrangement for small scale processors, which are in the villages, to provide them with machinery and support them on various issues. So for people, as a country, we want to assure the president will keep on safeguarding them, safeguarding their interest, and they keep on improving the environment to make sure that they should not regret the investment in processing cashew here in Tanzania.
I mean, it's certainly necessary. We've been listening to James Mulhall. I've heard many times from processors. The key issues for them are the ability to source from farmers, and this is more important now with traceability requirements, but also the availability of working capital. You've touched on those two things. I think also the advantage of quality and high quality raw material is important. Certainly there's opportunity for processing in Tanzania, in my view. But turning to raw cashew nuts, are there likely to be any change in the regulations this season for the export of raw cashew nuts?
No, we don't expect any change in the regulation. All the things will be like the previous years. If there will be variation, only one aspect which we are working on, the amount of tax to be paid in this council, but all other issues and taxes will be the same as the previous year. So there is no any difficulty or restriction on the part of the season. So most of this should be like season, like last year. 95%, nothing has changed.
Good. I think that's what business likes. They like a predictable, consistent regulation. So that's good news. And as I was saying, I think there will be significant demand for Tanzanian raw RCN at auction, although I'm not sure that the prices will start at the high levels that they started at last year. But let's go back to processing. I mean, we know that it's policy to develop value addition. What are the long-term plans for processing, the 5, 10, 15-year plans for the board and for the government in the development of processing?
Okay, as now, for example, I failed to join the meeting today because now, as we are talking now, I'm at Maranje Industrial Park, one of the industrial parks we are developing for cashew processing. Jim, our target as a country is by 2030 to process all the cashew that is being produced in Tanzania. Wow. That is one of our goals. By 2030 to process all our cashew that is being produced. So we've got various initiatives. One of them is to support the processors who are already existing here in different places of the country, to make sure that they are able to source raw material, process, and benefit from the business. But now also we establish industrial park For those who like to put factories, but they don't have land, we are giving land free of charge for 66 years lease at the industrial park for people who want to put the plants here. But also, Jim, I'd like to let you know that we want to have one of the very vibrant and very organized small-scale processing, which will be an example in Africa. We want to have a very good collaboration in the supporting small-scale processing in the village. You know, in Tanzania, when we sell cashew, for example, we end our season maybe, let's say, in February or first in January. But when you come to Tanzania, throughout, even now, if you come to Tanzania, you want to earn a container of kernels. Jim, in 1 week, you'll get a container of kernels processed by small-scale processors. So now we want to formalize them, organize them properly, and they come up with a very good arrangement to support the small-scale process because they are contribute significant amount in the amount of being of processing. So as we are going through the 2050 vision and increasing processing, one of the group we are going to look in a special way is small-scale processors to make them formal and properly organized to be able to reach the requirement of the international market.
That's really interesting. So I'm hearing the two strands, the large, let's call them commercial processors on the one hand with supports of land, location, an organized market, access to raw material, and on the other hand, small-scale processors who are fit to export. Interesting approach. It's a very ambitious approach, of course, but I do think that you have this advantage of being a September-December crop and producing high quality. The one thing I would say that's really important from an observer's point of view is that there are some success stories early, that the current processors make it, that there's new investment soon, because I admire the target, but it is ambitious. In short term, if we talk about the supply chain, that's a key issue. So we've heard that there is now guaranteed access to AMCOs early in the season and that window is there for maybe 6-7 weeks. What about the working capital is the other aspect. You've got if you're going to buy 10,000 tons of raw cashew nuts in that 6-7 weeks, are there any thoughts on improving access to working capital or improving the cost of it? Is there anything that the government or the board can do about that?
Okay, let me put it clear. For local processors, they're allowed to buy throughout the season from now up to August next year.
Okay.
What I'm saying, from now to mid-October, it means we have not started the auction. They can buy raw cashew, but also even after the start of the auction, they are allowed to continue buying cashew from the farmers. As we are talking now, Jim, even now as we are talking, some of the processors are buying semi-processed cashew from farmers in the villages. The business is proceeding and we are allowing them. So the processors are allowed to buy throughout the year. For example, the guidelines we have given out, which I saw, we was signed on 28th on August. It allows them to buy from AMCOS from December to 30th August 2026 throughout the year. But now, the advantage of now is that they'll be able to buy the new crop without any competition because there are no buyers from the foreign countries because the auction has not been starting now. It will be starting maybe end of October. So this window gives them even a big opportunity for them to get a good crop, which can be very suitable for local process to get and they process it. I don't know if I've answered your question.
You have. That's about access and about improved access. We're looking forward to a good season in Tanzania. I hear some tremendous estimates of the crop. And I think if you can achieve the goal of increased processing, it's going to make a huge difference. But it's very good to hear your review of the crop. I wish you all the very best for this season. I hope it goes well and smoothly. Let's go back to Stella and see if there are any questions for our guests.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alfred Francis. Yes, we have a couple of questions, and I would like to start with this long one. I think it will be addressed to Jim directly. The US currently imposes the lowest tariffs on imports from Vietnam as compared to countries like Brazil, India, and Cote d'Ivoire. Given this advantage, it's likely that the US buyers prioritize sourcing from Vietnam. Could this lead Vietnamese processors or traders to draw or remain on ASEAN inventories from Guinea-Bissau and Cote d'Ivoire to meet the export demand? Hi, Jim. Jim, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry, Stella. I lost you there for a moment. I was trying to restore to my phone. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. The question goes like this. The US currently imposes the lowest tariffs on imports from Vietnam as compared to countries like Brazil, India, and Cote d'Ivoire. Is it likely that the US buyers prioritize sourcing from Vietnam? Could this lead to Vietnamese processors or traders draw on remaining ASEAN inventories from Guinea-Bissau and Cote d'Ivoire?
But I think, well, first of all, whatever is coming into the United States is 89% from Vietnam anyway. It doesn't mean that there'll be an increase in volume into the United States. So I don't see the logic that the US would buy more from Vietnam and deprive India of ASEAN. I don't see that happening at all. There is no likelihood of it, any relationship in trade between Vietnam and the United States creating a shortage in India. The fact is that the most likely scenario in the second half of the year is relatively quiet trade between the US and Vietnam, and that trade will basically reflect what's happened in the first half of the year. Now, I think it's very easy to get into a kind of a speculative discussion on this. We've had a record crop. We're having a good crop in the Southern Hemisphere. The chances of a shortage developing are negligible, in my view. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Jim, it does. We have another question focused on Tanzania. How much volume is being processed in Tanzania for 2024 from January to December, and an estimate projection for 2025?
I think
Francis is better placed to answer that question.
He might be well placed to answer that question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. For example, for the last year, 2024, we processed 24,000 tons of the RCN was processed locally, including the large processors like Coastal Nuts and the small scale processors in totality. We processed 24,000 tons last year. And this year we are expecting to process more than 30,000 tons of RCN.
Thank you very much, Alfred. We have another question that I think would be directed to you. Someone would like to know if the Tanzanian government continues to buy nuts from producers. If so, what has been your experience with the process? If not, why stop it now?
First of all, let me say the government of Tanzania, for the past 4 or 5 years, has never procured any cashew from the farmers. So it's only happened in 2018-19 season. 2018-19 is when the government procured cashew from farmers. But since then, there has been no such arrangement to buy all the cashew from the process since then. And it will never occur. We don't have plan. That it just happened that time, but the government has no any other intention of buying cashew, the whole cashew from farmers.
Thank you very much, Alfred. The participant who asked the question would like you to repeat the amount of cashew kernels processed in 2024. He wasn't sure he heard the number right. Can we estimate 30,000 tons for 2025?
We can say for last year was 24,000. For 2025, we can say 30,000 metric tons plus.
Thank you very much, Alfred. I have another question directed to James regarding processing in Tanzania and the policies. What are two key policies that you think, as a processor, would improve the cashew sector in Tanzania?
Well, one of the policies, as Alfred has said, is the access to RCN. I'd like to say that I think there is, as Alfred has said, there is improvements from last year, and I think that the TACP and the CBT have worked well this year together, and we're trying to, as I said earlier, strengthen the TACP as our voice as an industry. So there has been improvements in access to RCN. That is the number one main policy, and I would like longer term access to it, but it's definitely an improvement that we have access to RCN now up until this time next year. The second thing that would be helpful is access to finance would be very helpful. We could talk maybe a third point of different levies and taxes, but again, as Alfred said, we're working through that process, and everyone is learning in this process, processors included. So some way of policy of access to finance, trade finance especially, that would be very helpful. So those two things, access to the RCN and access to finance. The responsibility then comes back on the processors to do their bit.
Thank you, James. And I think we are going back to Jim with another question. Jim, do you think African countries will be able to achieve the ambitious goal of transforming all production, of processing all production locally in the coming years?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It seems to me that that will be achieved. It's logical. It's in line with buyers' needs. It's in line with trends in the world. It's also likely be a difficult journey. I think that whereas it seems to me clear that the ambition will be achieved, the when is a much more difficult question, but let's not concern ourselves with that so much. I think more important is to look at what's necessary to make that happen, and areas, aspects of improved infrastructure, improved logistics to facilitate buyers' needs like traceability. And I think it's an interesting point James Mulhall made earlier, that the things like BRC are being asked for in all markets. So there's no easy out anymore. There's no market where you can send substandard. There's no market where you can send uncertified, unaccredited cashew kernels. All markets, from the United States in the West to China in the East, all markets are demanding these standards. What's the two biggest barriers, to my mind, have both been brought up in this conversation. One, in terms of the difficulties, that is the access to working capital and the origin-based processing challenge of buying your raw material usually in a 2 to 3 month period. Storing it, maintaining the quality, and processing it is difficult. The second aspect is marketing. And I think that it's really important that we develop improved approaches to marketing, that we identify what are the competitive advantages of African cashew processors, what is the story of African cashew processing, and it's on a continent basis, but also on a national basis, so that we have a clear customer-oriented offering that meets the basic requirements and more. It meets the requirements in terms of environmental and social impact, so that we need to take these things seriously. I think that the idea of building factories and hoping the buyers will come, well, those days are gone, thankfully. But we're probably at this point in time not doing enough on market development, branding, and capacity building and training of people who can sell. The most valuable talent is the ability to sell, and it's rather scarce. But it's also an occupation that has a certain amount of risk, and we need to encourage people to go into that, understand the market, and develop the necessary skills. So I remain optimistic. I think that the market situation and the technology situation and the supply situation are aligned to enable the development of processing. I think that this wave of processing is different and will continue to be different in the future. So yes, I do think that these objectives will be achieved. But please don't ask me to define when that will happen, because that's a much more difficult question. Stella.
Thank you very much, Jim. Our last question to James. How much annual volume is being processed by Coastal Nuts?
We intend to process 6,500 tons this coming season. We have a capacity for in around 10 or 11,000 tons. So this year we plan to build our capacity to 65%. It takes a while to, even with the machinery in place and everything there, to actually develop the skills and capabilities. Access to finance, of course, is one part, but internally it takes a little bit of time to develop your ability to make use of all the machinery you have. So 65% is the plan for this year, 6,500 tons. That's about 100 containers of cashews, and it's interesting to the market at about 100 containers.
Thank you very much, James. And back to Alfred. The 19th ACA Annual Cashew Conference and Expo is happening in 76 days. What should we expect for this coming conference in Tanzania?
Okay, thank you, Stella. I'd like to tell all people present this meeting that this will be one of the very best meeting in history, because so far a lot of people are showing participation to come to this to Tanzania, but also will be coming at the time when we are doing a lot of transformation in cashew. There will be a lot to learn, a lot to know regarding Tanzanian cashew that we are doing as a country in cashew industry. So I expect this to be one of the best ACA meeting in history, and I'm inviting all people from all around the world to come to Tanzania. We are going to create a very favorable environment for guests to come. We are going to provide a very good support for those who will be coming for the first time. Anything like support from the airport, how to get to the hotels, and all the difficulties. But also, we are arranging one of the visitation to Zanzibar, Ireland, one of the nice places to visit, but also the visitors will be visiting one of the best processing factory in the country. In Africa, maybe to tell you, Stella, Tanzania is one of the African countries where local processors are part and parcel of the local processing goal and ambition. Okay, so we've got locals who are having very well organized and established factories. Some people from other countries in Africa, they can come to learn and see what are we doing in Tanzania. And more than ever, Tanzania is the most peaceful country. So when you come here, you are sure of having a very peaceful stay and an enjoyable stay. And we've got the highest mountain in Africa, Kilimanjaro. you can organize a trip to national parks and the other thing yourself after the meeting. So we are prepared. We are doing our best to finalize all the arrangement, but we hope this meeting will be one of the best.
Thank you very much, Alfred. The dates are 18 to 21st of November this year. The venue is generic and the theme is unlocking cashew investment opportunities for sustainable economic growth. Listening to you, it seems the local participation is expected to be high. Am I right?
You are very right. You are very right. You are very right.
Thank you very much, Alfred. I'm going back to Jim. Hi, Jim. What should we expect for the next GME on the 17th of September?
Well, we're going to have a look at Mozambique during the next GME. We'll have a talk, hopefully with some representatives from Mozambique, and see what the crop situation evolving there. Meantime, let me give you just some outlook on the things to just keep an eye on as we go on over the next couple of weeks. Look out for, obviously, the Southern Hemisphere crop, Indian demand, and whether or not Vietnam comes back to the market to buy more raw cashew nuts. I think they will. In October, we'll be looking at the demand in India, particularly around the major festival Diwali. And critically, I think also we'll be looking at the situation in Europe, how Europe regards forward buying once they've had a chance to have a look at the books and the prospects. And then as we get into November, again, we'll be looking at the Tanzanian auction progress, the US economic outlook, which will again influence forward buying. So what we're looking for in the coming months is the Southern Hemisphere crops, demand in India particularly, and the level of forward buying for next year, because now we're really looking at starting to get into the situation where we look forward into what will happen in the early part of 2026. I'm looking forward to that. I am, by the way, also looking forward to meeting our guests today at the African Cashew Alliance conference in November. I'm sure that's going to be a great event, and I'm looking forward to being there. I would like to thank Alfred Francis from the Cashew Board of Tanzania for joining us today and for giving us such interesting information. I would also very much like to thank James Mulhall from Coastal Nuts for giving us some really good insights. James, thank you for these on what it is like to be a cashew processor in Tanzania, the trials and tribulations, so to speak. So thank you both very much indeed.
Jim, I'd just like to congratulate, I haven't spoken to Alfred directly on this, to congratulate him for attracting the ACA to Tanzania. It'll be a great benefit for processors and the whole association. So well done for doing that.
Thank you, James. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well,
sorry, Jim, to interrupt you.
Not at all. No, it looks like Tanzania is moving forward cooperatively. Let's hope that the season goes nice and smoothly. Looks like a big crop. Could be a great opportunity. Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks to everyone who joined today. I really appreciate that you do join us, and thank you particularly to those who ask some questions. Your comments are always welcome. You know where you can contact me. It's on your screen right now. On the 17th of September, we're going to focus on the other large producer of cashews in East Africa, that's Mozambique. And we're hoping to have some interesting guests from there too. But for now, thank you all the best. Thank you, Stella, particularly too. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, Alfred. Thank you, James. We are looking forward to having all three of you at the conference this year. And dear participants, they are all speakers on our plenary sessions, and we'll have more insights from them. I would also want to use the opportunity to thank the European Union, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, the GIZ Cashew Move Project, the Sustainable Nut Initiative, and the Cashew Club. Be reminded, the 19th ACA Annual Cashew Conference and Expo is taking place from November 18th to 21st of this year in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And the good news is that the early bird rates have been extended to September 30th. So you can still enjoy the 40% discount on all conference rates. All Global Market Encounter sessions with Jim Fitzpatrick are available on the ACA YouTube channel at African Cashew A, where you can watch all 86 recordings anytime. Until the next 3 weeks, enjoy the 30-minute networking session before we close. Bye.
En Afrique et en Asie, augmenter la compétitivité des produits finis tout en réduisant la facture énergétique grâce à la valorisation de biomasse représente un enjeu économique majeur pour les pays, tant pour maximiser la valeur ajoutée nationale qu'en matière de création d'emplois. Ces industries peuvent par exemple concerner la transformation de la noix de cajou, du riz ou encore du bois. Néanmoins, la gestion des résidus de transformation et l'approvisionnement en électricité peuvent s'avérer compliqués et coûteux pour les industriels. Le projet AgroGazélec, appuyé par le Fonds français pour l'environnement mondial, a pour vocation de les valoriser en les transformant en électricité au sein même des agro-industries. S'ils sont gérés de manière durable, ces résidus deviennent une opportunité pour ces entreprises. Leur facture d'électricité est effacée et ils peuvent également bénéficier de revenus complémentaires avec la revente de biocharbon ou de l'excédent d'électricité sur les réseaux électriques. L'objectif du programme est de développer une solution viable pour la valorisation des résidus agricoles et agro-industriels à travers leur gazéification et la production d'électricité dans des groupes électrogènes adaptés. De par sa modularité, cette technologie est adaptée pour des puissances entre 100 kW et 2 MW électriques. Cela passe notamment par la capitalisation d'expériences précédentes au Cambodge où IED Invest opère ce type de centrale depuis 2011 afin de transférer cette technologie ainsi que sa fabrication en Afrique de l'Ouest. La réalisation de projets pilotes permettra de mettre l'accent sur l'appropriation locale à travers de la formation et de répliquer ce modèle dans la sous-région, que ce soit à partir de coques d'anacarde, de balles de riz ou de résidus issus de la transformation du bois par exemple. Le programme AgroGazelec favorisera ainsi le développement du tissu économique local, la transition énergétique ainsi que la protection de l'environnement.
MEA was founded in 1993 and listed on the air share market